longevity science has become more prevalent in the zeitgeist, and I relish any opportunity to get to chat with an expert such as yourself. You're one of the preeminent longevity science experts, at least that I'm aware of, and so I'm excited to pick your brain for
I don't know. Are there experts in longevity science?
That's a good question. You tell me. I don't know.
I don't know. There's people that live to 100. You know, there's a few people that live to 100, 110.
Mm-hmm.
There's some exceptionally long-lived mice, but human experts, I don't know. There's it's really hard to tell. I mean, there's a big difference between human aging and mouse aging. Humans are actually very good agers. Mice are not particularly good agers. There's this diagram that Stephen Ousted and his people drew. Stephen wrote a really good book on aging called Methuselah's Zoo, I think it's called. And sort of like a diagram of the mass of an animal and its typical lifespan. So bigger animals live longer, right? There's kind of like more invested in them.
Interesting.
And so what you can kind of, to a first approximation, you can see if an animal's good at aging if it's above the diagonal, right? So among the primates, humans are the best agers. We're not the biggest, heaviest primate. Gorilla is bigger, but Homo sapiens lives longer, right? So that says that humans are good at aging.
So what makes us so special in the primate category?
Well, I don't really think anybody knows. I mean, and I think that we would be better off if people would be honest about what they really know and what they really don't know.
Oh, I love
like
this.
We know that DNA repair is better, in good agers than in poor agers. Like naked mole rats and mice are the same size, but naked mole rats live 10 times as long as mice. So naked mole rats are better agers than mice. They have better DNA repair. They're less susceptible to cancer. They're less susceptible to all of the kind of frailty that you see in a 2-year-old mouse. A 2-year-old naked mole rat is absolutely in its sexual prime. It's got all of the cognition that it will ever have. It hasn't really lost a step, right? And so healthy aging means that you're not losing a step when you get to sexual maturity, when you get to your full size and your sexual function is matured and your brain is pretty well matured. I guess men mature a little slower than women. It actually probably in every respect.
Painfully, obviously, at least in my personal life, yeah.
But basically, healthy aging is staying in your prime for as long as you can, and humans tend to do that pretty well.
Interesting. Does it have anything to do, I'm sure you're familiar with the grandfather or the grandmother hypothesis? Yeah, that we live a long time primarily because our offspring are born so prematurely relative to other animals.
I don't know if it's the offspring are born prematurely. It's that human babies are incapable of taking care of themselves, right? So a chimpanzee infant, as I understand it, can hang on to its mom. And a human infant cannot hang on to its mom, right? So chimpanzee infant, and you ever see these videos of like horses? They're born, and within 20 minutes or 30 minutes, they've stood up, taken their first step, and they could be running.
They're trotting around.
Yeah, they could be trotting, within an hour, which is just astonishing, right? And humans are really, really cute when they're infants, and they're really incapable of doing anything. And so there's a huge amount of parental investment that goes into human babies. We don't have that many of them, right? You have single child households, you have 2-child households, you have 3 and 4 child households. You'll occasionally hear of an 8 or a 10-child household, but the distribution is towards much smaller numbers of kids. Mice and rats can have litters of 10, right? So there's less investment in each one, and then humans aren't capable of really taking care of themselves for decades, right? I mean, and so there's a lot of, humans that are in the household until they're 20 or 30, right? In Europe, it's 30 or 35, and the thinking is that the human gene set is what it is because grandmothers who effectively grandparented provided such an advantage to their grandkids in reproducing that we have that gene set, right? So in general, when I just said that good aging animals are capable of reaching their sexual maturation and then maintaining function for a really relatively long period, which means that generally any male or female animal that you see in the wild is fertile, right, after it's an adult. There are kinds of insects where the male will reproduce once and then be dead. That's okay. That sort of follows the rule.
Yeah.
The ones that don't die after or get eaten after they copulate continue to produce sperm and can compete for females. Human males have a sperm count all the way through our life. It's dropping.
Yeah.
It's petering out, if we're allowed to use a turn of phrase. Females are different, right? So women reach the average onset of menopause is at 51, right? And then, but interestingly, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, in all of those decades, women are healthier than men, right? Which it seems to defy the logic of evolution, right? That women are no longer reproductively capable after 5 decades, yet remain in better health than men.
Yeah, it's
right?
wild.
It's weird, right? Because the gene set is allowing them to be healthy, even though they're not directly contributing to the gene pool. So the grandmother hypothesis is that it was important for women, human females, to be caretakers of the family, and that improved the odds that their grandkids would be reproductively successful. And so that's why we have the gene set that we have.
It's so interesting, yeah, because a human female is basically infertile for 60%, if not longer, 60% or more of their lives.
I don't know about 60%.
Well, it's like if the average age of onset of menopause is 50, right? And then you take into account all the years pre-puberty.
So, but that's only maybe 12 or 13 years. So, but if I guess if she has a it's roughly half her lifespan, right? So there's a period before she's reproductively mature, and then there's a period after she doesn't have viable eggs, right? And so the before, I consider that aging also. That from conception to birth, there's a developmental component of aging. And from birth to puberty, there's a developmental component of aging. And in puberty to reproductive maturity, there's a developmental component. We don't pathologize those, right? That's good, normal growth, right? And then people start getting anxiety about aging after they reach their reproductive peak, right? After you get to your full height and your full ability to maintain muscle mass, right? Testosterone starts declining. A lot of the female hormones start declining. Certainly AMH declines, anti-Mullerian hormone declines. And people get anxious about aging, and they want to age better, certainly in that component of after we reach our reproductive maturity. But I don't consider it a disease, right? And if you want to call me a longevity expert, I'm going to say there's not single gene solutions to improve human aging. There's lifestyle that has improved human aging. There's clean food that has improved human aging. I would argue that vaccination has improved human aging, and that toilets and public hygiene systems have improved human aging. But I don't see a lot coming out of the laboratory right now that is improving human aging.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to get into the prescription for aging well and to get into all of those many nuances. But before we get to that, there are many people today are talking about anti-aging science, longevity science, calorie restriction, fasting, low-protein diets. What would you say are the biggest misconceptions out there currently when it comes to anti-aging or longevity science?
Yeah, one of the misconceptions is that it's going to be easy to extend the maximal lifespan of humans. I don't think it is. I think that the goal of human longevity research and lifestyle and practice is to get more people to be healthier to 90 or 100 or beyond. I think that that's achievable. Actually, my laboratory developed something that potentially has a role in that. As you know, we discovered NR, nicotinamide riboside, as a vitamin precursor of NAD. NAD is the central catalyst of metabolism. There's a lot of conditions of metabolic stress in which NAD comes under attack. You can take NR as an NAD precursor as an oral supplement. It is proven to be anti-inflammatory in 7 different human trials, as being tested in a lot of other things. I don't think it's going to extend human lifespan, but I think that there's a potential for NR in helping people to age better, right? Calorie restriction, protein restriction. I don't think that you can make blanket statements about these things. I think if people are living with overweight, calorie restriction is the proven mechanism for weight loss, is to be in a caloric deficit, right? That's why the new drugs are effective, right? Is they get people to be satisfied with smaller meal size, right? And there's also some evidence that it reduces sort of hedonic eating. There's a less desire for drugs and alcohol. There may be less desire for kind of addictive foods to some degree, but basically it's limiting the amount that people are eating. So it's putting people into calorie deficit. So if a person has overweight, then calorie restriction certainly makes sense. But should you and I be telling everybody that they need to calorie restrict? I think that's irresponsible to do, because the people that are more likely to do it are the people that are more likely anxious about everything that they're eating, right?
Yeah,
and kind of orthorectic.
Or that's a big problem today. Yeah, orthorexic behaviors and fear,
the people say, oh, I need to be clean eating and blah blah blah. Well, obviously, don't eat garbage, right? Don't eat food. I mean, if the tree was sprayed with pesticides, wash your food, right? But the idea that huge categories of food are toxic and that you need to cleanse, and that you can't have your coffee when you wake up in the morning, and these kinds of things are kind of obsessive practices that don't really help anybody.
Yeah, I had a conversation once with Don Lehman, who's like a protein expert, and he was saying that it's an illogical leap to assume that humans on a perennial calorie deficit, which for one would lead to ultimately death, right?
Yes.
If you're perennially in a calorie deficit, that to go from mouse studies involving calorie restriction to suggesting that humans ought to perennially be in a calorie deficit doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't.
In a mouse, you're basically just disallowing them from overeating. That's what calorie restriction implies.
Correct. So the comparator group in typical mouse experiments is called ad libitum fed, which means it has a pile of food in its small cage at all times, right? That's not a natural condition for a mouse. A mouse is supposed to, a mouse in the wild scurries around from sunset to sunrise. They're nocturnal. And from sunset to sunrise, they acquire all of the calories that they need in 24 hours. They have like subsistence living, right? And so they have to be active and mentally active and physically active to find all of those calories, to acquire them and to get them. And they're in a very challenging environment where they could be eaten by an owl any day, right? Or they could eat something that's poison, any day. So that they have to be smart as mice go. Now we put them into these hotels in the animal facilities where there's no owls, right? And people come along and they give them water and food, and the food hopper never runs out. And so that's actually a model of overnutrition.
Got it.
Right. So the control group is overfed,
and mice will eat themselves to obesity if given the opportunity, right?
Mice will gain a lot of weight when they are housed in this way. I mean, there are certain mice that are worse off. Like there's the so-called DB mouse and the OB mouse. One is, I think, the leptin gene, and the other is a leptin receptor. And those mice are constantly eating. But mice also lose their sense of, day and night because the food bowl is always there. The food is there in the daytime. And then sometimes we give them high fat food, right? And which is something that they would only encounter, opportunistically in the wild. They'd be happy with kind of anything they get, but we give them food that is 40 or 60% lard, and it's like field day for them, and disrupts a lot of things. So yeah, compared to that ad libitum, which is really overfed feeding group, the calorie restricted mice live longer and are healthier. Does that mean that humans should be chronically calorie restricted? No. Because if you and I go into calorie deficit, we're going to go from whatever weight we're at now to actually one thing that's going to happen is our metabolism will lower, right? Because our metabolism is really smart and adaptive, right? And so if you lower your energy intake, your body will dial down your energy output. You probably are going to be less effective at running, thinking, and doing all the things that you want to do.
It's adaptive thermogenesis, right?
Thermogenesis is putting out more energy output, right? But you actually will lower your body temperature. If you're really calorie restricted, you're going to be cold. Yeah. So it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I told someone recently that if all of my scientific competitors want to calorie restrict themselves, and if 100% of them decide to not have breakfast, and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to get up and have my espresso and exercise and have breakfast, and they want to compete with me, that's great. That's fine with me. Some of them may be well adapted to not have breakfast, but I doubt that all of them are. I function better with breakfast. So I don't. My time restricted feeding is, I don't necessarily have a lot of food after I have dinner, and I sleep at night, and I don't, sleepwalk, and I don't eat, in my sleep, and so that's my, time restricted feeding. I don't feel the need to obsessively dial down my energy intake window. Now, if that works for somebody, that's great. But I don't feel like you and I should be giving everybody advice that pretends that we know how to optimize life for them.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the more reasonable takeaway is actually the common sense takeaway, which would be don't allow yourself to be overweight and especially not obese.
Yeah, but that's hard, right? In this environment, that's really, really hard, right? I don't think that overweight is, don't think it's fair to describe it as a failure of willpower. I think that, the animal experiments and the human experiment that we're going through says that in the current environment, as a function of your zip code or your lifestyle and the environment that we're in, a majority of people will, acquire more weight than is optimum for them.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We're like those mice, though. We're like
Yeah.
those overfed
Yeah.
mice in
Right.
constant proximity to
Right.
hyperpalatable, super calorie dense food.
Right, and then the food hopper is kind of like the M&M bowl in the office, right? So if we all go into the office and then we have ad libitum access to snacks and stuff in the break room, then it's tough. It's tough. So you want to stay active.
Yeah. What about the whole protein restriction notion that by restricting protein, specifically calories from protein, that's going to help us, reduce activation of mTOR,
yeah.
this growth pathway?
I wonder if that's coming from the rapamycin people. Yeah, I mean, I don't take leucine or BHB, but I would be more. I have actually taken BHB in the past when I was doing a lot of lifting. I'd be more likely to take, leucine or BHB than rapamycin. I would not. I don't want to inhibit my mTOR. I'm 62 years old, and
You look good.
Yeah, thank you. My partner is a 43-year-old marathoner that ran a 3:23 or something like that in Chicago last year. So I got to chase after kids and run a lab and I don't want to be protein restricted because I think that healthy aging requires the maintenance of skeletal muscle mass and function, right? You want to lift some heavy things. You want to get a sweat, over the course of the day. And I think you need protein to maximize your skeletal mass and function. I don't really supplement with any protein powders. I don't take any leucine or BHB. But I could more see the argument for that than for protein restriction. Yes, I know that in a mouse cage, there are some protein restricted mice that can live longer than non-protein restricted mice, but they don't die of falls. Mice don't die of falls. Humans, elderly humans that are, like a 70 or 80-year-old woman or man with low skeletal muscle mass and relatively lower bone density, right? That's diminished from when they were at their reproductive maximum in their 20s. Those people, have a serious hazard that they could be very seriously injured from falls.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, that's just reality,
Yeah.
right? So, the people that talk about aging research that don't actually think about or don't experience elderly people in their lives are not doing anybody a favor. I mean, if you've dealt with older parents or you've gone to old folks' homes or you talk to PTs or nurses that work with elderly people, you understand better that people need to maintain their skeletal muscle mass, right? And then you talk to somebody like, Stu Phillips, and he'll tell you need protein to maintain your skeletal muscle mass. So I am impressed with what rapamycin does, to mice, but I don't think that it's going to turn into human anti-aging medicine. And I don't think the extrapolation in terms of restricting protein is going to be all that great for elderly humans.
Yeah, I mean, my dad is 74 years old, and he eats what is very clearly a low-protein diet, not because he is concerned or not because he's avoiding protein, but just because he was never taught that the value of dietary protein, the value of maintaining skeletal muscle as one ages. I mean, the guy's never lifted weights a day in his life. And so I look at him as a 74-year-old, and he is frail, and it breaks my heart. But it's, the idea that this should just be overlooked, that skeletal muscle is just something to be concerned, if you're for vanity reasons, it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. Skeletal muscle, is responsible for most of our glucose disposal, right? So skeletal muscle is really important. The mass of it, the function of it, maintaining your balance, right? So I change the kind of, workouts that I do. For a few years I was doing a lot of, yoga. My wife got me into Pilates, which is incredibly hard, by the way.
Especially for a male.
It is so hard. And I'm going back to HIIT workouts now. And, you need your balance, you need you need some power, and you need your respiratory fitness. You need all of those things.
Yeah. When it comes to types of protein, are you an equal opportunity protein consumer? Do you eat animal protein? Do you eat?
Yeah. I'm an omnivore. I probably think that animal saturated fat is worse than you do. I don't consider butter a superfood.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I've never been.
Okay. Good. And so I think that, small portions of animal protein are great. Huge portions of animal protein, I think are less great for humans. And, but I absolutely, I love food. I think it's great to have a good, healthy attitude, with food, and to cook food and to share food, and but I'm an omnivore.
Yeah. I think I get people have this misconception of me that don't know my work very well. They think I'm a carnivore advocate, or that I'm a high saturated fat kind of guy, which I'm not. I think that I just think nuance needs to be brought to the conversation. Yeah. And when you look at the data, only 3% of your average American saturated fat intake comes from meat in and of itself. The rest comes from these like mixed dishes, pizzas, fast food burgers, desserts, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And my argument has always been that if it's in a whole food, it's not something to be concerned about.
Yeah.
It's the added, like, I wouldn't say that butter is a health food, although I indulge in it on occasion. But that's a pure isolated extract. And it's also, I know that the data on dairy fat seems to be fairly actually neutral from a cardiovascular standpoint, with the exception of maybe butter.
Yeah.
So that's all I try to do, is bring nuance back to the conversation, and not fearmonger animal source foods.
Not fearmonger, and if you're putting butter on something, you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you're obviously working out. You can't really argue with results, right? So if a person has a sustainable practice that involves eating breakfast or not eating breakfast, or eating meat or not eating meat, it works for them, it's great. Let's encourage them. The key thing is sustainable practices, right? Whatever you can manage to do.
Yeah. As somebody who studies the field of longevity, what do you think when, Netflix series like the Blue Zone, the Blue Zone series that just came out on Netflix drops, and it makes all these claims about, this very seemingly cherry-picked group of communities around the world where people seem to live a long time, and much is made about their diets, their lifestyles. Like, what goes through your head when you see something like that, when it becomes a part of the, the zeitgeist?
I haven't seen the series. I'm basically familiar, with the concept. Okinawans are pretty mobile, right? And so they have a lot of elders. People walk a lot of stairs, and have a lot of mobility, in their lifestyle. That's obviously really good, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have a ton of processed food in their life. They cook themselves. So those are obviously good practices. If more people did the basic things, I would say what your mom taught you, kind of. So be physically and mentally active, socially engaged. Drink water, as your primary hydration. Avoid drugs and alcohol. Avoid accidents. Avoid violence. Those are kind of the main things.
Yeah. I agree that there are so many variables in those communities, and it's obvious that it's they're not consuming a lot of added sugar. They're not consuming a lot of ultra processed foods.
Yeah. But I mean, there's other things that are probably exaggerated. Like they might say, oh, there's some, I don't know, purple potato that is eaten in some particular culture, and they try to convince you that the purple potato is a quote superfood, and that some golden potato that I just bought yesterday is not. And God bless all the varieties of potato. We probably don't have enough varieties of potato in our life, but I tend to think that some of the phytochemical pieces of this are exaggerated. Like there all sorts of things have been ascribed to resveratrol and curcumin and fisetin and all of these things, and what the data say is that people that have the most leafy green vegetables in their life have a higher exposure to all of these phytochemicals, but it doesn't mean that you need to supplement with one isolated phytochemical, or that one particular molecule in a cruciferous vegetable is responsible for the benefit of eating vegetables, right? The vegetables have fiber in them. They have a lot of stuff. They don't have a lot of calories. That's the good stuff, right?
Yeah, makes total sense. Do you think there's value in supplementation today? I mean, we talked a little bit about NR, which, you were on the podcast previous, and we did a masterclass on NR and NAD metabolism. But, isn't it fair to argue that the modern world that we've inherited living in the United States, and, obviously we live in really privileged parts of the United States, right? But that in many ways the world has become kind of toxic. I mean, food system aside, we're inundated with exposure to various carcinogens. We've talked about that on the past. Plastic-related compounds, forever chemicals, endocrine disruptors, things like that. Isn't there an argument to be made that we should be doing things to stack, going above and beyond to stack the odds in our favor, particularly today, where there seems to be so much dysregulation in the world at large?
I mean, I personally study the dysregulation of the NAD system. And essentially we found that I could probably name you 10 different conditions of metabolic stress, many of which occur to us inevitably, that disturb the NAD system, right? So going all the way back to sunlight and oxygen, right? So sunlight is largely good for you. You don't want to get too much ultraviolet B, so I would strongly make an argument for sunscreen. But being out in the world is good, right? Being physically active out in the world is good. You see a little nature, walk around, meet people in a city. All of those things are good. And literally in your stroll outside, you are exposed to light that can damage your DNA, right? By forming what are called pyrimidine dimers, and oxygen, which generates reactive oxygen species, both of these things can disturb the NAD system. Alcohol can disturb the NAD system in the liver. Overnutrition, when we fed those mice the high-fat diet, and when people are exposed to excess calories, it can disturb the NAD system in their liver. Infection and inflammation disturb the NAD system. Coronavirus disturbs the NAD system. Postpartum disturbs the NAD system. So we found kind of use case for NAD boosting supplements, and NR is the biggest piece of of NAD that can get into cells. Now NR is available as a clean tested supplement. So I think there is a use case for NR. Someone told me that in statin use, which is pretty common, that coenzyme Q comes under attack. I haven't fully evaluated that, but that sounds plausible. There may be other examples in which, as you say, there's toxins or exposure things that make you sort of situationally deficient in something. And so I'm sort of open to that idea. But overall, I also kind of believe that food and exercise are medicine, and that, there's a cycle of life where, we take in protein, fat, and carbohydrate. We also take in micronutrients, and we digest all of that stuff, and we build ourselves. So, if you are eating liver, which I personally love, you're getting protein, you're getting fat, you're getting a lot of NAD. The NAD is being broken down into things like nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide, and nicotinic acid. It's going into your body, and your body is regenerating NAD. So in the case of the NAD system, it does look like it comes under attack in a way that's sufficient that you can see benefits from supplementing. In other cases, people might be creating expensive pee, right, by taking supplements that are largely just kind of flushed out.
And what is NAD for somebody listening who's never heard the term and isn't a scientist? Like, how would you simply explain it most simply?
Okay, so one way to think about it is really the fundamental way to think about it is electricity. So our bodies are electrical devices. So unlike the electric car that I drove here with that has a huge battery that has to be plugged into something, or a toaster downstairs that is plugged into a wall outlet, the energy that we get ultimately comes from the sun, right? The sun is shining on the earth. The earth is growing green plants. And then we're coming along and we're either eating the plants or we're eating the animals that eat the plants. And that food has energy in it. And our cells harvest what are called high energy electrons from the food. It's harvested onto NAD. And so NAD is harvesting high energy electrons and transferring high energy electrons to make ATP that powers everything in our body.
Wow. And so we have NAD, powers everything in our body, but as we get older,
as we get older and as we experience these conditions of metabolic stress, the NAD system comes under attack and benefits from oral, supplementation.
We talked about alcohol last time quite a bit.
Yeah.
That alcohol is one of these things that really seems to deplete the system. Is there any safe level of alcohol? Do you drink alcohol at all, or? I had
a glass of wine, last night at Shabbat dinner, and I drink less than I used to. I think I sleep better when I drink not at all. But I think that people have, kind of their own tolerance of alcohol. But in the liver, it's a known fact that in the liver, alcohol gets detoxified in the liver. It ends up producing acetate, which is not harmful. But there's an intermediary product called acetaldehyde that is toxic. And in the course of conversion of ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate, there's a conversion of NAD plus to NADH. NADH is not a bad thing. It's required to make ATP. But if you shift the balance from NAD plus to NADH, you get the liver to be better at making fat than oxidizing fuels. So chronic ethanol use can contribute to fatty liver.
Fatty liver, yeah. That's no bueno. What's the relationship? Is there a relationship between nicotine and NAD?
So it's historically, yes. nicotine was one of the first organic chemicals that was ever purified, right? So people, I can't remember when, I think that nicotine may have been largely discovered in the New World by European explorers, brought back to Europe, right? And then people said, wow, this plant is amazing. You got to smoke this stuff or chew this stuff because it's so stimulating, right? And the nicotine was purified a very long time ago. And when Conrad Elvehjem in Madison, Wisconsin, was trying to find vitamins, he actually made nicotinic acid, or others had made nicotinic acid from nicotine.
That's niacin, right?
Yeah, niacin, right. So you can actually make niacin from nicotine. We're actually working in the lab to see whether nicotine interferes with the NAD system. We have some suspicion that it does. Nicotine's primary function, its neuroactive function, has to do with binding to nicotinic acid receptors. That's not really NAD related, but we think that there may be a part of nicotine toxicity that involves interfering with the NAD system. We don't fully understand it. I'm not going to endorse nicotine. I know that, a lot of people enjoy it, and, that some writers can't, do without it. But it's very habit forming, it's neuroactive, and there may be a component of nicotine toxicity that relates to incorporation into the NAD system, but we don't fully understand it yet.
Yeah, from my vantage point, it seems like the big question mark is it good or bad for the brain? I know that it has potential toxicity or I don't know if toxicity is the right word, but repercussions on the cardiovascular system with, the acute raising of blood pressure, heart rate,
yep,
vasoconstriction aspect to it. But subjectively, I use it intermittently, very occasionally, but I found that it's a pretty powerful nootropic cognition booster for me.
Right. So that's the way it was used by Native Americans, right? Is that it wasn't a multiple time per day habit. It was used in a ceremonially, or maybe in a intense discussion of like, let's put our heads together and think about something. And so, yeah, there's potentially use cases for it. Obviously, you have to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Because it's super addictive.
Yes, yeah, would agree with that. Very interesting, because it's become trending now on social media. A lot of people are talking about it. Certain influencers will talk about it on podcasts and the like. And I just think it's definitely something that needs to be studied if people are doing it. And the research is it's always seemingly confounded with smoking, obviously, and smoking is toxic. There's innumerable carcinogens in combustible cigarette smoke, and but to my knowledge, there's not a ton of research on nicotine in and of itself.
Yeah, ironically, I know some terrific pulmonologists that enjoy a very good cigar,
Interesting.
but not often,
yeah,
right? And the key is managing something that has a high addictive potential.
Yeah, the dose makes the poison.
Right.
Are there any major biomarkers of aging? Like what, a lot of people talk about these like telomere tests and things like that. Anything of note worth?
It's really function, right? So how you look, how you feel, what's your mile time. To me, those are the most important things. I don't see a consumer use case for the age test kits, right? They don't agree with each other, for one thing. Whether there's a bunch of different technologies, it's DNA methylation profiling or other kinds of blood biomarkers. There's glycan age and all sorts of things. I don't think that they tell you anything useful. They correlate with people's age to some degree. People that are aging worse have more advanced scores on those tests. But If you were to lower your score on that test, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live longer. On the other hand, if you take 5 seconds off your mile, you've taken 5 seconds off your mile.
Yeah.
And no one can take that away from you.
Yeah.
Because you can do something that you couldn't do. Or if you can keep on doing something, like if you can keep on playing tennis with your kids, even though they're growing and we're trying to just maintain, then you're doing well. So to me, these functional tests are more important than consumer age kits.
Like, can you get up off the floor?
Yeah. I mean, there's some challenging ways to get off the floor, right? There's some challenging ways to get out of the bathtub. You can either, use your arms and, or you could try to do it without, right? And the things that gymnasts can do, if you want to try to train yourself to do, very difficult balance things, that's an age test to me that has value.
Yeah. Do you study peptides at all? Have you looked into that stuff? There's a lot going on now in the regenerative medicine space, whether we're talking peptides, stem cells, exosomes.
No, I haven't paid much attention to it. I'm not sure that it's super evidence-based. There's a lot of claims that are made out there that are not really substantiated.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know with peptides, there's not a lot of human data. There's like one or two human trials on one of the more popular peptides, BPC 157, which I started taking knowing that there's not a lot of human data on it, but anecdotally, a lot of athletes have taken it and seem to see benefit with regard to like injury recovery and stuff like that. So yeah, I just thought I'd ask because people are talking about them. So from a high level, like somebody listening to this who's interested in aging successfully, right? Like what are the highest level, like if you could make 3 recommendations for somebody listening to this today that they should start doing if they're not already, what would those be?
I would say challenge yourself would be number 1, if not 1, 2, and 3. So you want to, challenge yourself physically. You want to keep on trying to do hard things physically and mentally. 2 is probably prioritize sleep. And 3, I think that there is a use case for nicotinamide riboside. When you talk about athletes in injury recovery and workout recovery, that's something that is very widely reported with NR.
Interesting.
And one of the things that we want to do is we want to do a placebo-controlled trial of wound repair. So whether quite a lot of people have wiped out on their bike or their skis that are taking Niagen, which is this safety tested nicotinamide riboside, and have recovered just remarkably. So that's the plural of anecdote is not data, right? But there's a lot of anecdotes like that where people recovered much more rapidly than they thought. If you go to the animal literature, you can see these mouse models where NAD is declining in the skin, and that if you boost their NAD with nicotinamide riboside, they heal faster. So we think that this would be a good clinical trial where, for example, everybody that's getting a shave biopsy for something that's not cancer, could be given placebo or NR, and you could test whether skin heals more rapidly, with NR. So I think that has a potential to demonstrate something. For sure, NR has demonstrated anti-inflammatory activity in 7 trials. So, and inflammation is a component of the kind of decline that occurs in aging that, in your liver and your muscle and all these other tissues, you get different kinds of immune cells that are kind of infiltrating. A healthy liver is almost all hepatocytes. And fibrotic or inflamed liver, there's a lot of immune cells. And so what the effect of NR is to kind of keep the inflammation very low so that multiple organ systems, including skeletal muscle and liver, can do the things that they're supposed to do.
Wow. And at what dose do you think injury repair and recovery?
So the athletes in clinical trials are typically taking a gram a day. Yeah.
It's True Niagen, it's like 250 milligrams per capsule. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think the consumer dose is 300 milligrams, but there's actually a product now that's a gram.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because the reason why I'm taking BPC 157 now, along with some other peptides, and I recently had a stem cell procedure, is because I have chronic, for a decade now, low back pain. And so, yeah, I've tried all the rehab and the PT and strengthening my core, all that stuff, and it's fairly persistent. So I'm just trying to throw anything I can at it. So it's good to know that this may potentially help as well. Is there any cancer risk with boosting, with taking NR, with boosting NAD?
I don't think so. I mean, this is a supplement, right? And it says on the bottle, not intended to treat diseases and conditions. Could it potentially drive cancer? I think it's unlikely. There could be some, tumor genotypes that would be driven by higher NAD. For the most part, we've seen a lot of tumors that are initiated at lower NAD, where the DNA repair is not as strong, where the responses to inflammation are not as strong. And there's animal models in which NR is strongly anti-tumor. But, this is not medical advice. So, obviously if people should ask their doctor and all that stuff.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. It's big business, obviously, longevity, the field of the consumer, I guess, field of longevity, and quote unquote anti-aging related products. But yeah, I love getting to pick the brain of somebody such as yourself, because I feel like there are so many misconceptions out there.
Yeah, people should live their life. I mean, life is a joy and is a privilege. Try not to pathologize aging. Try to stay active, and don't be too prescriptive. Other than try to do some hard things.
Yeah, try to do some hard things. So, are you now lifting weights, or is it just
Pilates?
Yeah,
I'm gonna get back to HIIT and do some faster things and do some more weight bearing stuff. Yeah,
because I think for a long time it was primarily like, do aerobic exercise, like boost cardiovascular health by way of aerobic exercise. But this is fairly new, like this thinking around like skeletal muscle and its value.
Is it new?
I don't know. I feel like, well, my vantage point is that, from a basic science standpoint, it's been known that, cardiovascular exercise is beneficial to mice. It's a lot harder to get a mouse to bench press and squat and deadlift to see how that impacts their longevity.
Yeah, right.
So now I think we're having, more longitudinal data, a more sort of granular look at skeletal muscle and thinking, and I guess a more broad perspective in terms of how skeletal muscle, as you mentioned, impacts glucose regulation and the like.
Yeah, I feel strongly that we want to preserve our skeletal muscle mass and function.
Is there a point of diminishing returns, or should we all be focused ultimately on getting as jacked as possible?
I don't know that you have to be as jacked as possible, but you have to live your life, right? Yeah. I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, and so
because I want to get jacked. That's my whole thing. It was like, I love lifting weights, and I have this genetic ceiling that I'm trying to push up against. Especially at 41 now, I'm fighting against the declining levels of testosterone that I don't think I'm actually experiencing, but statistically I know past a certain age, we're all fighting up against.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that's my MO.
Yeah, and if fighting helps you work out harder, then fight, right? And that's part of do hard things. But I think that there's a line that you don't want to cross into being too obsessive about it. You don't want to be too obsessive about your food. if you worked out 44 minutes rather than 45, it's not going to matter, right? It's just trying to stay active and do the things.
And keep the brain engaged as well, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any strategies for cognitive longevity that you're aware of that are worth considering?
I would say be around young people, be around people of all ages, be around smart, inquisitive people. Ask yourself questions about what is the evidence basis for what I believe, and challenge yourself.
Yeah. What about social media and mitigating stress? You're pretty active on social media, which can be a stressful, dumpster fire at times.
Yeah, it's not entirely a healthy place.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Any other high-level take-homes, tips, misconceptions that you think are worth debunking? Because, we live in a time where I feel like everybody has a voice, and that can oftentimes be a good thing, but oftentimes it can be counterproductive.
Yeah, well, I guess the last thing I'll say is that there's been a bunch of hype about longevity genes. I don't think that dominantly acting longevity genes exist. Like the sirtuin genes were described as dominantly acting longevity genes. That's basically been debunked. There are animals that have both copies of a single gene inactivated that live a really long time. They're generally in pituitary pathways, right? Growth hormone receptor mice live a very long time, but you wouldn't want to be that mouse, right? Because that's a tiny little mouse that can't keep itself warm, can't compete for food, and doesn't sexually mature.
Interesting.
And so the idea that because there are single gene longevity mutants in worms and mice, that human longevity is going to be easy, it doesn't really follow.
These are mice that overexpress growth hormone?
No, they don't have growth hormone.
Oh, they no growth hormone.
They have no growth hormone, or they have no growth hormone receptor. And so it's a tiny little cold mouse that lives a very long time. But ironically, we could go to a Hollywood longevity medicine office, 3 blocks from here, and they would offer us both shots of growth hormone, right? If we said that we need to be in a movie in 9 months, and they would say, well, you're lifting, terrific, and Brenner's going to get back into HIIT, we're going to give you shots of testosterone and growth hormone to make you more jacked, right? The animal research says that is going to shorten our lifespan, right?
Interesting.
And why? Because, these are sort of, puberty associated factors that accelerate aging.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah.
What does growth hormone do in the body?
Growth hormone helps you be anabolic, right? It helps you maintain skeletal muscle mass. But the same research that says protein restriction extends lifespan in animals shows that growth hormone restriction extends lifespan in animals. What I think we've agreed in this hour is that protein doesn't need to be restricted because you want to try to maintain your skeletal muscle mass even while your growth hormone levels and testosterone levels are going down. But that it doesn't follow that you should be boosting your testosterone or growth hormone in your 40s or your 60s. I think that short term, that's going to allow you to gain more skeletal muscle mass, but in the long term, I don't think it's going to be good for you. So basically, I'm saying I don't think that there's a shortcut.
Interesting.
You got to do the work.
Well, a lot of men today are on TRT. Do you think from a longevity standpoint that that's not the best idea?
I think it's not the best idea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, people say that it makes them feel like they're 20 years younger, but so you're saying that's a short term, there's a trade-off.
I think it's a trade-off. Yep.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are using it, and but probably a lot of people are using it to get back to physiologic levels of testosterone, because most people that I know, even in my age bracket, their testosterone levels are oddly low for their ages, and so they're using it to get back to like whatever their appropriate level should be.
Yeah,
it's super interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what mine is. I just know that I'm functioning, well in all the ways that matter to me. So I guess my parting words would be, do the work, stay active mentally and physically. And I don't really think that there's a shortcut. It's like, volume of exercise is really important. Volume of sleep is really important, right? And volume of food is ultimately, if it's not in balance with your energy expenditure, is going to be a problem.
Sage wisdom. Well, thanks, Dr. Brenner, for coming out. I've got one last question for you before we get to that. Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me at Charles M. Brenner on Twitter. I think the same on Instagram. And my lab website is brennerlab.net.
Brennerlab.net. Awesome. Last question that gets asked to everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
Just doing your best, being honest, and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thanks so much for coming out on this rare rainy Los Angeles day.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.